Part 1. When family ties become chains, close your eyes and imagine standing inside a golden palace, where everything shines and everyone looks up to a royal family. Beautiful music drifts through heavy velvet curtains. Crowns sparkle with precious jewels. But behind all that glitter, there's something far more important: royal blood. Not just any blood, but pure blood. It's a source of pride for the royal family. But for many women, it became an invisible chain that trapped them for life. Most people think being a princess or a queen means an easy life, fancy food, expensive clothes, and servants ready to do anything for you. But the truth is, there's always a hidden side to every story. From the moment royal girls are born, their future is set. They don't get to choose who they love or marry. Even a simple crush is quickly forgotten, because their entire life has already been planned by others. Sometimes that plan means marrying someone in their own family, sometimes even a brother, an uncle, or someone just as close. Just imagine being forced to marry your own brother, uncle, or even your father, all so the royal blood stays pure. How would you feel? Shocked? Scared? Most of us can't even picture it. But for many royal women in the past, this was their reality, with no escape. Those big, bright palace parties often hid terrible secrets. Behind the fancy dresses and sparkling jewels were women quietly worrying about their future. Some girls grew up playing with their cousins, only to be told that one day they'd have to marry that cousin or another close relative. Their wedding night, something that should be a happy memory, became a night of fear and sadness, knowing that their husband was someone they'd grown up with as family. All of it, just to keep the bloodline clean. It wasn't just in ancient Egypt or medieval Europe. Royal families everywhere, South America, all over the world, have stories of these marriages. The details are different, but the pain is the same. Children were born sick or with disabilities. Some never made it past childhood. Women carried the burden of their family's decisions, watching helplessly as their children suffered. Now, picture this part of history that is rarely told. For hundreds or even thousands of years, thousands of young women gave up any hope of living a free, happy life. They became tools, bridges to keep the royal blood pure. Their fate was decided long before they ever had a chance to speak for themselves. And what happens when family pride turns into the root of every tragedy? When a crown becomes too heavy to bear, many dream of being born a princess, thinking it would bring happiness. But behind the grand ceremonies and loud cheers, there were mothers crying in the dark, heartbroken over children who wouldn't survive, or who would never truly live. Perhaps the greatest tragedy is that these women couldn't complain, couldn't even speak about their pain. Even a single word could bring shame to the whole family. Outsiders saw them as lucky, but only the women inside the palace knew about the sleepless nights and the loneliness that lasted a lifetime. Have you ever wondered what would have happened if these marriages hadn't taken place? If the princesses had a choice? Could history have changed? No one knows for sure. But one thing is clear: these stories didn't end. They live on in the memories and in the blood of those who came after. Among all those women, some stories stand out as especially tragic. Some girls, from the moment they were born, had no control over their own destiny. They were not only victims of tradition, but symbols of their time's darkest secrets. These are the stories of the most inbred women in history, stories filled with pain, mystery, and endless questions. What could make someone give up all hope for happiness just to protect a pure family name? Why did whole royal families risk their own children's lives for power and pride? And what really happened to the most inbred woman in all of history? We'll answer these questions as the story continues. The deeper we go, the more shocking the truth becomes. The worst secrets of history are still waiting to be discovered, hidden behind those golden palace doors. And to answer the question of who is the most inbred woman in history, let's analyze together, and you will know the answer. At the end of this video, Part 2. Bloody Rules: Why Royals Chose Inbreeding Too Truly. Understand why some women were forced into such painful and strange marriages. We have to travel back in time and look closely at the rules that shaped royal families. These rules weren't made overnight. They came from centuries of fear, ambition, and the obsession with keeping power no matter the cost. Long ago, kings and queens believed that pure blood was the secret to holding on to the throne. Power was everything. Imagine a king who was terrified that an outsider, even a distant cousin, might try to claim the crown. What better way to keep the family's grip on power than by marrying only inside the family? If every prince and princess married a cousin, uncle, or even a sibling, there would be no risk of an outsider taking control. But it wasn't just about paranoia. In many cultures, marrying within the family was seen as something honorable. Ancient Egyptians thought their pharaohs were living gods. To them, the only way to keep the blood of gods running through the royal family was to marry brothers and sisters. In other places like medieval Europe or old Asian dynasties, cousin marriage was almost a tradition. Even if it sounds shocking, now, back then, it was a symbol of strength and royal purity. Of course, not everyone agreed. Sometimes, the people, those who lived outside palace walls, would whisper and gossip about what was happening inside. They wondered how these marriages could possibly be good for anyone, but their voices were almost always ignored. The royal family's word was law. The outside world didn't matter, as long as the family stayed on top. What made these rules? Even more powerful was fear. Royal advisors would warn the king, if you let your children marry outsiders, they might turn against you. Our family will lose its throne. The fear was real. European history is full of stories where a single royal marriage brought down a whole dynasty, just because someone with the wrong blood got too close to the throne. But power didn't always mean happiness. For a young princess, these rules felt like prison bars. She might fall in love with someone outside the family, but that love had no chance. The king or queen would arrange her marriage before she even had a say, and the match would almost always be someone already in the family. The message was clear. Love didn't matter, only the bloodline did. Sometimes, there was another reason. For inbreeding, money.
Bye-bye.
By marrying within the family, kings and queens could keep land, castles, gold, and jewels from being split up among too many people. The fewer outsiders who married in, the more the family kept for themselves. It was a simple, selfish reason. But it drove many decisions for centuries. Not every royal family used these rules the same way. In some places, a little bit of cousin marriage was enough. In others, like Egypt's Ptolemaic dynasty or the famous Habsburgs of Europe, the rules were pushed to the limit. Brother married sister. Uncles married nieces. Generations passed, and the family tree turned into a tangled knot, but the results were always the same. More and more children were born with illnesses, disabilities, or strange behaviors. At first, the royal doctors tried to hide these problems from the world. If a baby was born sick, the family would keep it a secret. If a young prince or princess couldn't speak, walk, or learn like other children, they might be kept out of public sight. The truth slowly leaked out anyway. The people in the city started noticing, why did so many royal children die young? Why did some princes never appear in public? Rumors began to spread, rumors of curses, evil spirits, and family secrets. But the real reason was much simpler and far sadder. These royal rules, meant to protect the family, were destroying it from the inside. Imagine being a young princess, knowing your fate is already written. You hear your parents talking about power and tradition, never about love or dreams. You'll realize that sooner or later you'll have to marry your cousin or even your own brother. The thought keeps you awake at night, but no one cares about your fear. All that matters is the bloodline. The palace becomes a golden cage. The world outside is full of possibilities, but you're trapped inside by ancient laws, if you dare to. Break the rules, you might lose everything, or worse, bring shame on your entire family. Some women tried to escape this fate, but most had no choice. The price of being born royal was paid in loneliness and lost freedom. Still, the royal families didn't see what was coming. Generation after generation, the rules stayed the same. Even when the signs of trouble were everywhere, children dying, illnesses spreading, they held on tighter, too afraid to let go of the old ways. They believed these rules were their shield, not knowing that the shield was crumbling. History is full of stories where pride came before disaster. Royal families thought they could control fate by marrying within their own blood. But the cost was higher than they could ever imagine. They were building their dynasties on quicksand. So why did these rules last so long? Why did so many families ignore the warnings and stick to their traditions? The answer is simple and sad. Fear, greed, and the hunger for power. It's easy to judge them now, but back then, no one knew the real dangers of inbreeding. They just wanted to protect what was theirs, no matter the cost. What does this mean for the women at the heart of our story? They were caught in a web that had been spun long before they were born. Every choice they made was shaped by rules they never asked for. Their pain, their hopes, their lives, sacrificed for a family name. But the worst was yet to come. As we go deeper, you'll see how these bloody rules didn't just hurt one woman, but an entire line of queens, princesses, and innocent children. Their stories are waiting in the next chapter, stories of pain, secrets, and the price of royal pride. Are you ready to see what happened when the rules of power turned against the very people they were meant to protect? Part 3. Shadows of Blood. The chilling cost of inbreeding now. Let's step into the next darker chapter of this story, the part where all those royal rules about marrying family members finally catch up with the people they were meant to protect. The palace walls, once built to keep out danger, now hold secrets that even the bravest courtiers whisper about only behind closed doors. At first, inbreeding seemed like a clever way to stay in power. But nature has its own rules. Rules no king or queen can change. Over the years, something strange began to happen in the royal nurseries. Babies were born sick, with twisted limbs, weak bodies, or minds that seemed forever lost in a fog. Sometimes a newborn would not even survive the night. Other times, a child grew up, but was never quite normal. Doctors tried to help, but there was only so much they could do. Medicine was not what it is today. People back then believed in curses and evil spirits, but the real curse was hidden in their blood. One royal midwife wrote in her diary that she'd never seen so many tiny coffins leave the palace gates. For each grand celebration, there were 3 quiet funerals. And what about those who lived? Some young royals were haunted by deep sadness, fears they could not explain, or wild outbursts that embarrassed the family in public. There are stories of princesses who talked to themselves or wandered the palace alone, lost in their own world. Princes who never spoke a word, who stared into space for hours. Behind every golden door was a mother praying, hoping her child would be the lucky one. These tragedies weren't just hidden from the world. They were often kept secret from the royal children themselves. Some never understood why they were always tired or why their legs wouldn't work right. Others were taken away quietly, sent to far-off estates, never to be seen again. The family hoped that, with enough time and distance, people would forget, but palace servants noticed. Local doctors noticed. Over time, the rumors grew. It's easy to look back and feel angry or even shocked at these choices. But the truth is, most people back then simply didn't know the science. They believed that tradition was safety. Even as generation after generation saw their children suffer, the royal families held on. It was as if they were trapped in a nightmare of their own making, powerless to change the path set for them. Imagine being a young queen, holding your newborn for the first time only to realize after a few days that something is wrong. Your child doesn't cry, doesn't move, doesn't smile. You hope and pray, but the court doctors shake their heads. The people outside celebrate a new royal baby, but inside the palace, you're already mourning. No one dares speak of it. You wear fine clothes and put on a happy face, but inside, your heart is breaking. History is full of these untold stories. One famous example is the Habsburg jaw's strange, jutting chin that showed up in almost every member of the Habsburg royal family of Europe. For centuries, this family married their own cousins again and again, thinking they were building a stronger bloodline. But all they built was a legacy of illness and sorrow. Charles II of Spain, a king from this family, could barely eat or talk. He suffered from epilepsy and was so weak he couldn't walk without help. He died young, leaving behind a broken kingdom. But it wasn't just the men who suffered. Women, too, paid a heavy price. They were expected to have lots of children. But many lost baby after baby. Some became mothers to children who would never grow up, always needing care, always suffering. The pressure was enormous. These women often turned to prayer, or even alcohol, just to numb their pain. Outside the palace, the people began to wonder why so many royal children were sick or dying. Whispers grew louder. Is the family cursed? Are they hiding something? Superstitions mixed with fear, and sometimes anger at the royal family. They were supposed to be chosen by God, so why did they seem so unlucky? It's heartbreaking to think about. These were not evil people. They were trapped by rules they thought would protect them. Every generation hoped things would get better. Every mother wished for a healthy baby. But the rules of nature were stronger than the rules of kings, and the cycle kept repeating. The more the royal families tried to keep outsiders away, the more the problems grew. The family tree that was meant to keep the dynasty safe became a cage-trap that left many of its children broken and alone. So what kept these families from changing? Fear, pride, and the weight of tradition? Even when the price became clear, turning away from the old ways felt impossible. No one wanted to be the first to break the chain, afraid of what others would say, or what would happen to the throne. But the stories didn't end in the palace. Sometimes secrets leaked out. A young servant would tell a neighbor. A doctor would talk to his wife. Bit by bit, the truth escaped, and people on the outside finally began to understand what was really happening behind the palace gates. As we turn the page to the next chapter, ask yourself, how far would you go to protect your family name? Does loyalty turn into cruelty? And, most important of all, who were the women who suffered most from this curse of royal blood? In the next part, we'll meet some of these tragic figures, princesses and queens whose lives were shaped, and sometimes destroyed by choices they never made. Their stories will shock you, move you, maybe even make you question what it truly means to be royal. Part 4. Bloodline Roses, the tragic women of royal inbreeding across history.
Ow.
Royal families believed pure blood was their key to keeping power. But for many royal women, this meant being forced into marriages with relatives, brothers, cousins, or uncles, making them both daughters and wives within the same family. Their destinies were set before they were born, trapped by tradition and duty. Isabella II of Spain's life was shaped by inbreeding. Her parents were uncle and niece. Her own marriage was to a double second cousin, and she endured many pregnancies. With few surviving children, rumors swirled about her health and family scandals, her reign ending in tragedy and exile. Marie Louise of Austria also suffered the results of generations of cousin marriages. She was married off to Napoleon, carrying the hopes and burdens of her family tree. Illness, loss, and sadness haunted her life, much like Maria I of Portugal, who married her own uncle and lost half her children to genetic complications. It wasn't only in Europe. Lorraine Whittaker became infamous as one of the most inbred women alive, the result of generations of isolation and family marriages. She and others like her remind us that the pain of inbreeding is not just a thing of the past. Even the legendary Habsburg family, once powerful rulers, could not escape the toll. Their family line became marked by birth defects, early deaths, and public gossip. The more they tried to keep outsiders away, the more problems they faced inside the palace. The stories of these bloodline roses are stories of women who paid a personal price for royal ambition, women who lost their freedom, health, and often their happiness. Among them, one story stands out above all: the most inbred woman in history. Part 5. The truth revealed: the most inbred woman in history. At the heart of royal inbreeding is Cleopatra II of ancient Egypt. Her life is the ultimate example of how family pride could become a curse. Born into the Ptolemaic dynasty, Cleopatra II's parents were siblings, and her grandparents were siblings as well. Her own marriage was to her brother, following a tradition meant to keep the bloodline divine. For Cleopatra II, family and power were inseparable, and so were pain and loss. Many children in her family died young or suffered from illnesses caused by generations of close relative marriages. Her reign was marked by betrayal, civil war, and personal heartbreak. Cleopatra had to navigate shifting alliances and survive repeated attacks from her own relatives. Science today explains what her ancestors could. Inbreeding increases the risk of birth defects, disease, and early death. Cleopatra II's story is proof of this tragic reality. The dynasty's desperate grip on tradition brought more sorrow than strength. Yet Cleopatra II was more than a victim. She ruled Egypt for decades, showing resilience despite the odds. Her story is a warning. Traditions meant to protect a family can sometimes destroy it. From within, the legacy of royal inbreeding did not end with Cleopatra II. The same patterns, repeated across empires and centuries, a reminder that power built on fear and secrecy rarely brings happiness. Behind every royal crown, there was often a woman trapped by rules she did not choose, her life shaped by the shadow of her own blood. Part 6. Fate and Fallout. The lasting consequences and the lessons learned after meeting Cleopatra II and the tragic women of royal bloodlines. The story doesn't just end with their deaths or the fall of their dynasties. Instead, their fates cast a long shadow over history, a shadow that still stretches into our own time, whispering lessons about pride, tradition, the risks of turning a blind eye to nature's warnings. For centuries, royal families across the world struggled with the consequences of inbreeding, even when the pattern was obvious. They saw their children become sickly, weak, or die before adulthood. Still, the old habits were hard to break. The fear of losing power, land, or reputation. It was often stronger than the fear of illness or heartbreak. Every generation believed they might be the lucky ones to escape the curse. But history showed otherwise. One of the clearest examples was the Habsburg dynasty in Europe. For hundreds of years, they ruled vast territories: Spain, Austria, the Holy Roman Empire. They married close relatives to protect their wealth and status, but each generation brought more health problems. The infamous Habsburg jaw, a genetic deformity, became a symbol of their decline. Charles II of Spain, the last of his line, could barely speak or chew, suffered from seizures, and was unable to produce an heir. When he died, the Spanish branch of the family ended. Their great empire lost to history. But it wasn't only the royals who paid the price. The people they ruled also suffered. Wars broke out over who would inherit the throne. Countries were thrown into chaos by weak or childless kings and queens. The effects of royal inbreeding shaped the politics of nations, redrawing maps and changing the lives of millions. Some royal women tried to resist their fate. Queen Victoria of England, who married her first cousin, Prince Albert, watched as her descendants spread a genetic disorder known as hemophilia throughout Europe's royal houses. As science advanced in the late 1800s and early 1900s, more families began to understand the risks. The rise of genetics and the stories of tragic royal children finally forced a change by the 20th century. Most European monarchies abandoned strict rules about marrying within royal circles. They began to allow marriages for love, sometimes even with commoners. Slowly, the power of tradition gave way to the needs of health and happiness. Today's royal families are healthier and happier, with fewer scandals rooted in the old obsession with bloodlines, but the legacy of royal inbreeding is not just an old story. In some remote communities around the world, and in families isolated by geography or tradition, the same problems appear. The Australian outback. The case of the Colt family shocked the world, a modern reminder of what happens when families close their doors too tightly. In parts of the Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia, cousin marriage remains common for cultural or economic reasons. The health risks are well known. The story of royal inbreeding is, in the end, a story about the tension between tradition and change. It asks us difficult questions. How much should we honor the past? When should we break with custom to protect the future? Are we brave enough to change, even when it means letting go of pride or power? But there's also a personal lesson seen in the lives of women like Cleopatra II, Isabella II, and Marie Louise. These were people, not just names in a history book. They were daughters, mothers, and queens who lived under the crushing weight of expectation. Many never got to choose their own path. Their pain, their loss, and even their moments of hope deserve to be remembered. For modern readers, the lesson is clear. Sometimes the cost of tradition is too high. Health, happiness, and the chance to build a better life must come before outdated rules. Science now helps us see what generations before could not. The bloodline is not more important than the well-being of those who carry it. Yet, the fascination with royalty endures. People still dream about being a prince or princess, imagining palaces and power, but rarely do they think about the hidden burdens. The truth is, even the most glamorous life can hide secrets of pain, sacrifice, and lost freedom. What can we learn from these stories? First, that history is filled with people just like us, making hard choices and paying real prices. Second, that the mistakes of the past can become warnings for the future. We're wise enough to listen. And finally, that real strength comes not from old traditions, but from the courage to change and protect the next generation. Perhaps the most haunting lesson is this: when power becomes more important than people, everyone loses in the end. Today, royal families try to honor their history while building new, healthier traditions. Around the world, more communities are learning from the past, using science and compassion to break the chains of old beliefs. As you finish this journey through history's most inbred women, think of the silent voices behind the palace doors. Their lives changed the course of nations, and their stories deserve to be told, not as warnings, but as calls to choose love, health, and wisdom over empty pride. So the next time you see a glittering crown or hear a fairy tale about kings and queens, remember the truth behind the gold. Remember the women who paid the price. Remember that the best legacy we can leave isn't a name or a title, but a life lived with courage, kindness, and hope for something better. Conclusion. Lessons from the shadows of power. The stories of history's most inbred women remind us that even behind golden crowns and royal titles, real people suffered for the sake of tradition and pride. Their pain teaches us that old rules, no matter how sacred, should never come before health, freedom, or happiness. The true strength of a family or a society lies not in clinging to the past, but in having the courage to change for the better. As you leave the story, ask yourself, what traditions do we still follow without question? Do we put pressure or limits on those we love because of fear or pride? Let's learn from the past. Let's choose compassion, understanding, and science over outdated beliefs. If this story touched you, share it with others. Start a conversation. Be the voice that helps break harmful cycles. Because history only truly changes when we do.